I'm okay with. I know that. Welcome, everyone. I know some people will be joining in a couple minutes and they'll just kind of trickle in when they trickle in. But for those of you that are watching live, thanks for watching live. And again, my name is Dr. Serena. I'm your co-host for this show on the Pendulum. And as you can see, we're going to talk about Happiness Happens Month. Oops, I do that a lot apparently with my PowerPoint. And so August is actually Happiness Month. And I thought, what a very interesting topic to talk about because it's kind of like, bringing in some sadness with the end of summer coming and people going back to school and the weather changing. And so it just seemed like a topic that might be useful to be a little bit more proactive about, how can you make happiness happen? And so I'm going to spend today's podcast and then also the one in 2 weeks on Happiness Happens as well, because there is a lot of information. And surprisingly, as I was putting this together, a lot of different things that, emerged from not just the research, but things that I've also accumulated as well. And so I'm happy, no pun intended, to be able to kind of put them together and to talk about it. So welcome, Linda. Welcome, Lori. Thanks for joining me. And so I wanted to also just mention that in September, it is Suicide Prevention and Recovery Month. Those are be the two topics that I'll talk about in September, and those are the respective dates for that. So let's just go ahead and get started about, first, what is happiness? And a lot of people, when they define happiness, it's really this kind of like elusive term. So if you think for a moment, like when somebody approaches you and says, what is happiness? How might you define it for yourself or in response to that question? Some people might define it as like, a feeling state or being content or joy or, just having good things happen. And those are all different variations of what happiness is. And as you can see on the screen, there are these different variations of the definition. Now, what's interesting about it is that you could use happiness as both a noun and a verb. So it could be an object, a thing, right? That when we think about what a noun is, a thing, it's something that might be possessed or something that might be pursued. It's like an accomplishment, a goal that we work towards, which is what a noun might be, like an apple. You eat an apple kind of a thing. But when it's a verb, it's a little bit more kind of elusive because it implies some sort of action to it. And it can also be variations of that verb too. And so, depending on how you kind of perceive happiness, a lot of times that's also going to make a difference in terms of what that looks like in your own life and the different things that can be done in order to cultivate it more. And so looking at kind of the factors that hinder happiness, one of the things to keep in mind too is that, psychology is typically studied pathology, so if you think back about psychology, and this is kind of known, that psychology studies more about psychopathology and pathology and how to relieve it, understanding when things are not working well, right? And how do we find solutions to that? And so, and counseling is a field that focuses more on wellness, and social work focuses on something different, and family therapy focuses on something different. So the reason I'm pointing those out, behavioral health focuses on something different. And, I could say that because having a degree in 3 different areas, it's like being able to see how these different subjects are siloed and also can work very much well together as well, together. But in 1998, the president of the American Psychological Association, Dr. Seligman, I believe is the pronunciation, he, really kind of shifted what psychology researched. And, psychology is scientific study. That's really a big part of what psychology does, is that it pursues scientific proof for different uh, things that are happening in the psyche. And so he looked into well-being and really kind of emerged this whole field of positive psychology. And a lot of you may be very familiar. You've probably heard of positive psychology, but that's really when it took off, was right before the millennium. And so he was president, I believe it was for 98, 99, and maybe another year in there. But that is really when positive psychology took off. And positive psychology is the study of well-being, of how humans can flourish and cultivate well-being as well. And so happiness was part of what he was looking at. So there were a lot of different studies, here and there. They were kind of sporadic and dispersed in the field at the time. They were in different areas. And so he collectively kind of looked at, okay, this is something we need to kind of pursue a little bit more. And so that's what he did. So in the course of, recognizing happiness as this kind of construct with well-being, there's a lot of myths that emerge with happiness. And this is one of the things that actually get in the way of happiness itself, which is kind of a paradox, if you think about it. So I'm curious to know if anybody either that's on the call right now or is listening, knows, what is like a myth of happiness that you may have or have heard about. Hi, Cheryl. Welcome.
Hi, Serena. Thank you. Uh, I I don't know. I'm not sure if this is. I'm sorry, I'm late, but I'm
It's
not
okay.
sure if this is what you're talking about. But a lot of people think that money will buy happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's maybe a myth of happiness.
Absolutely. And that's a great example. I mean, like money can definitely help you
Yeah,
be
sure.
happy.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of research that demonstrates, and it was interesting because there was this course that was offered back in 2020, like right before or right around when the pandemic hit, and it was called The Science of Well-Being. And Dr. Laurie Santos taught it at it was either Yale or Harvard, I can't remember. And it was the most popular course at the
Mm.
university. Like every student wanted to take this course. And one of the things that she had talked about in this course was about this factor of how people pursue making more money because they think it's going to make them happy. And what research has actually found, at least, this was back then, the research that was done at the time, was that there's actually a set point for when people make a certain amount of money, there is really no like additional happiness accumulation that occurs if they make more than that. What tends to happen is that when people make above a certain amount of money, um, if they want more, it tends to be this kind of like movement barometer that, oh, well, now I need this much more amount of money to be happy. Like it moves with the amount of money that they're making. But most people have in this research and in the research that she did for this course, um, had demonstrated that, at this particular level, and I think it was around like in the, I want to say something like 70,000 or something like that. It was somewhere in there. That was like a kind of the happiness factor. But, that's something you can look up to just to get the accurate number. But yeah, so that's a myth. Anybody else have a myth or something that they've heard or know about that can hinder pursuit of happiness? So I know, oh, go ahead. No, no,
I was
go
just,
ahead.
I have a question if I don't want to interrupt anybody else if they want to
No.
say something, but what about relationships? Sometimes people think I just need a boyfriend or a girlfriend, something like that.
Yeah,
And
so
that will make me happy, that kind of thinking.
yes, it's that thinking that is the myth that
Hmm.
if only X,
Yeah.
then Y, right? So, and there's no play on words there, but but that
That's
is
fine.
but that is the myth is that there's this kind of conditional belief that my happiness is conditional. I can only be happy if I
Right.
have certain things, if I make a certain amount of money, or if I have a certain job or a certain relationship, or weigh a certain amount, or my life looks a certain way, kind of a thing. Yeah, so that's definitely another myth that is there. And along with that kind of thinking pattern, a lot of other thinking patterns kind of fit into it too. There's this kind of absolute thought process that some people have. It's, this kind of black and white thinking or heads and tails thinking that people may have, where it's either one extreme or the other. You're either happy or you're not happy. There's no in between. Um, and so either I'm happy with everything or I'm not happy with anything, kind of a thing. And so it's very limiting in a way because it doesn't allow for room. It's um, an absolute mindset, so to
No
speak.
flexibility.
No flexibility, absolutely. So, oh, no pun intended again. So there we go. Just keep, I'm not doing that on purpose, by
But
the
it's good.
way. So, but that is another myth, is that there is that no flexibility in
Yeah.
thinking,
Yeah.
right? So conditional, no flexibility in thinking, money being another myth of happiness. And, another big one that people have is that it's something that you find outside of yourself. It's not something that exists within you. A lot of people have this belief that, happiness is something that's out there. And so it's very externally oriented. And a lot of times that's because of how we are conditioned, how we are raised, things that we see in our environment. It could be, things that we've seen growing up, things like that. But it's not something that comes from external sources, because those external sources can be gone at any time. And so happiness really is an internal characteristic that's controlled and not necessarily controlled, but it is influenced internally. And so there's a lot more variation internally that takes place that people don't realize that they actually have. Um, so I don't know if there's any other myths that people have or want to talk about. I'm sorry, Lori, did you have a myth?
Oh, no, no, no. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
that's okay. No worries.
I didn't,
Um,
I was unmuted.
oh, that's all right. No worries. One more that I just want to mention is that there's also this kind of belief that happiness occurs in bursts, that there is this intenseness to it. That when I feel happy, it's, I feel it, like I just feel it. And, the idea with happiness is that it's something that it can be cultivated, and it can be this kind of slow and steady um, space. It doesn't necessarily have to be this kind of big dopamine hit. And a lot of people have the belief that in order for me to feel happiness, I have to have this kind of big dopamine hit. And happiness can be a slow and steady thing where you are cultivating it on a regular basis rather than it coming in like a roller coaster. And so that's another myth that, may be present for people as well. So kind of given all that, those are five big myths that are talked about in the research as well. The other thing that hinders happiness is, of course, biology. A lot of research shows that there is a genetic component to it. And some of the research is a little bit different about this. There is some research that says there's a 30% factor involved with biology. I've seen research that says 50%. So if we go by like 30 to 50% of happiness is genetically influenced, you have kind of like this set point of positive and negative kind of emotions that exist for you. So it's kind of similar to like having this temperament. This is influenced by, family genetics. Okay, so if you look at like patterns in your family, you and your own patterns, there's kind of like this predisposition, quote unquote. And so it's not saying that you can't influence it. What it is saying is that, yes, there is this kind of set point that you have. And so it may just require a little bit more effort if that's something that you're willing to do. It just means that recognize that, okay, this is what is present for you. And so it may mean that you need to do things a little bit differently, or you need to incorporate things a little bit more than maybe somebody who doesn't have that influence, or who may have a less genetic influence. So that's what it's saying. Now, the neat thing about this is that with biology saying that it's between 30 and 50%, it means that there's a 50 to 70% factor that is out there.
Yep.
That is, influenced by us as a human being. And so, it's just taking that nudge, taking that kind of push in that direction about, okay, well, what then can I do and what needs to happen in order to nudge this happiness factor in that direction? And so we're going to kind of also explore that as well. Another thing that gets in the way of happiness is the pleasure principle. I don't know if anybody has heard of this before, but the big difference with the pleasure principle is this kind of notion, that we have this, and I kind of mentioned it in the myths a little bit, but this is really about this instant gratification. There's this idea that happiness is, again, this very intense experience that when I'm happy, it's this like boom feeling, and then it just kind of goes away. And then I'm left to wait, dramatically for the next moment. Kind of a thing. And that's not necessarily the case. Reality, or I'm sorry, the pleasure principle is also about long-term satisfaction. So when people are, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. The pleasure principle is about instant gratification. Instant gratification. It's about getting what you want when you want it, and usually it's right now. And then the opposite effect of that is more of that kind of long-term satisfaction. So kind of think about the difference between, the satisfaction that you get when you've achieved or when you've worked towards a goal that you've been working on for a long time. And then when you finally get it accomplished, there's a very different feeling that you experience than with something that you immediately experience and get right away. It's a very different experience, the two are, because the one requires a little bit more effort on your part than the other. And there's also this kind of like, putting things off, like you have to earn something that allows you to experience satisfaction. With instant gratification, it's more of the brain kind of compelling you to do something, so it almost feels like sometimes you can't stop yourself. Sometimes, people that have substance use disorders experience this. This is what instant gratification is about when substances take over and hijack the brain. And so even for people that, want that second helping of ice cream, and they're just like, oh, no, I'm just going to go. I just want it. I want it now. And I'm going to go do it. And then they, might sit back and be like, why did I have that second helping of ice cream? I'm suffering right now. It's a very similar kind of instant gratification. The brain kind of takes over because it likes that dopamine hit. It's very intense. And so it compels a person to do something in order to gratify the brain. And so the behavior is a resulting factor of that. Long-term satisfaction is much different because it lasts much longer. There's a lot, it's a very different experience when people have long-term satisfaction. And we're going to talk more about that later. So the mindset is another factor that gets in the way. I talked a little bit about this a few minutes ago. We talked about this kind of like, Cheryl, you mentioned this like fixed mindset, this non-flexibility. And so that's what the mindset is about getting in the way. There's a very fixed kind of tunnel vision mindset. And that gets in the way of, and kind of prevents or slows down or hinders or can stun happiness from occurring. It could be anything that's limiting, any kind of limiting belief, any kind of well, that doesn't seem like it will make me happy. We don't know yet. So anything that just kind of hinders the possibility. The reality principle is another one. And so what this is really about is, just really looking at circumstances. This is about what's happening around you, what's happening in your life. It's also about perception. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about perception probably next time. But perception has a lot to do with happiness, how we perceive things and how we can shift that as well. And so the reality principle really focuses on, how do we actually perceive our reality? What are we focused on? How objective do we see things occurring? How present do we stay? Are we focused more on the facts of our life, or are we focused on what we are not getting in our life? What we're missing or what we're misinterpreting in our life. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because at least, with people that I've worked with, this is one thing that I've seen happen a lot, is that oftentimes when people have what hinders happiness is that their focus is more on what's missing in an experience rather than focusing on what the experience actually is. So the focus is very different. It's not on the facts that are present, it's on what they don't have, which are not necessarily factual. So it's a very different focus, so to speak. And then the sixth one is action. So this really has to do with things that people do or things that we don't do. This is routine, this is habits, this is our comfort zone. This could be like not wanting to get out of our comfort zone because it takes a little bit of effort to get out of our comfort zone, and we don't know what's going to happen. If we were to step out of that comfort zone, and sometimes it really takes a push to step out of our comfort zone. And many of you can probably think of situations where you were quote unquote pushed out of your comfort zone, and it was very uncomfortable. It was not a happy situation. And so it might have then resulted into something that was a better experience or made things better. But initially, it was not a happy circumstance. Or maybe it was, again, it depends on the person. But the idea is just recognizing that oftentimes it's the actions that we currently engage in that can hinder happiness, and the actions that we don't currently engage in that can hinder happiness. So it can work both ways. So this is the last slide that I'm going to go over because it's probably the only one that I'm going to have time for since there is so much information. But let's look at what contributes to happiness. And what's interesting about this slide when I was putting this together is that, I talk about the chakras a lot. And the second chakra is the sacral chakra, which is actually the center of joy. which I thought was so fitting. Like I'm talking about happiness, and we're going to talk about factors that contribute to happiness. And it just so worked out to be that this is the joy center. So this particular chakra, the second chakra, is about fluidity. It is about things that flow. It is recognizing that things are not fixed, that there is this kind of, you know, very, not a roller coaster. So it's not this intense kind of wave, but it comes and goes. You know, there's ease with it. There's some comfort with it, but it's easier than not. So this particular chakra has to do with sexuality, with creativity, with boundaries, with emotion, with our sense of self. And keep in mind too, you know, the first three chakras, the root chakra, the sacral chakra, and the solar plexus are what's considered the lower chakras, so the lower vibration chakras, and they are essentially more about us. You know, they're very egocentric, very I centric. And so when we get to the fourth chakra, which is Anahata, which is the heart chakra, that's really that unstruck perception space, you know, where you could see things for what they are without being affected by other things. And I'm going to talk more about that in terms of happiness next time. But so factors that contribute to happiness, um, we're looking at one is this biology again. So as I mentioned before, you know, 70%, you know, again, it was like 50 to 70% of biology. That means that we have some room that can be influenced by us and what we can do about that. The second one is about emotions, and this is really just recognizing that emotions themselves are physical sensations. So there's a little, you know, there's two different kinds of perspectives about emotions that exist. And it's very fitting for this particular chakra too, because it can work differently for different people. One is some research has indicated, and there's a great YouTube video on this by Dr. Oh, I just Bartlett, I believe her name is, and she's done research on this for 25 years, and so her research lab has come up with the fact that, you know, emotions are really predictions that our brain gives us this idea that, okay, this is what you're going to experience in this situation because this is what's been happening to you all these past times. And so this is what's going to happen again. And yet it could be a very different experience that we're having. So we're being affected by what our brain tells us because of our past experiences, which is very similar to being influenced by previous information without seeing it for what it is, without allowing ourselves to perceive it in a new way. And so emotions are fluid, you know, they come and go. Many of you have experienced this where one day you could feel really great, the next day you're feeling great, but it's not as intense. And sometimes you're angry with somebody, and then a few days later it subsides. You may still feel it, yet you're not as angry as you were the first day. And so we know that emotions are like waves, they come and go. And oftentimes it's recognizing that emotions will contribute to happiness as well. And we can kind of choose and increase positive emotions. We can have experiences and we can look at what kinds of situations or activities or things allow me to have more positive emotions that allow me to feel more happiness. And those are things that can help in contributing to happiness. So really quickly, expansion is about your mindset. I'll talk more about Gretchen Rubin, who wrote a book in 2009 called The Happiness Project. It was a bestseller, a national bestseller. But she spent a year pursuing happiness and wrote a book about it and talked a lot about it. And expansion is about growth mindset. And she, you know, came up with this definition about it, which I'll talk about. next time. Number 4 talks about perception and experience. And so again, this is about that non-influenced perception, non-conditioned, non-expected space. Number 5 is about, if we can meet our basic needs and how do we have the means to meet them? What are our resources? Who in our environment do we have? Who's in our support system? Those are also factors that contribute to our happiness. And then the last part is servicing others. Connections are very important. And this is also connections that we have with ourselves. Our relationships with ourselves, our relationships with other people, love is happiness. And so relationships are essential for that, but that's also authentic kinds of relationships. So I'm going to stop there because I know we're out of time in about a minute, or we are out of time, but I want to just see if anybody has any thoughts that they want to share or any questions.
I have a thought.
Yeah,
So sometimes I just make up my mind to be happy.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Absolutely. Yes. And there are things that can actually help influence where it's going to be more positive and in the direction where it works more effectively for you. But yes, that's one of the things that when people just make up their mind to do it, like you said, it's like a byproduct, right? It just happens.
Reminds me of just looking at the chart, biology can influence your emotions. One can influence two.
Absolutely.
Because if
Yeah.
you kind of will yourself to be happy, or you decide, or you choose, then that's going to have a big effect too. So that's what she just said made me think about that.
Yeah. And so you're also influencing two chemical, neurotransmitters that are being elicited in your brain too by doing that. You have some sort of influence in terms of what chemicals are being released by these kind of choices that you're making and by the actions that you're doing. And so that is going to contribute to your experience of happiness as well. So next time that we meet, or in 2 weeks, actually on the 20th, I'm going to talk about how you can cultivate happiness and the heart chakra, and then also how to shift your perception and your experience. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today, and I hope that you will be back in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Serena.
You're welcome. Thank you all.